one of the reasons that I've always thought that the Mediterranean blue zone thing seemed like a little bit of potential bullshit, or like required some additional evidence, was like how we know Japanese people and Greeks just don't live longer on some natural shit, because that's literally how every other kind of organism works. Like we live longer than rats, not because we eat some different shit. We're genetically predisposed to live longer. So why wouldn't that affect, like, why would we assume that the effect has to be diet related? We know even within a single population, a lot of the reason that motherfuckers live mad long is because of some genetic shit. Combined with, there are other effects that we know are going on, but it's like
there's genotype and phenotype, there's nature and nurture, but genetics plays a part, I believe.
It's a red flag.
I saw this article or some shit where a dude was saying like, all that blue zone shit, and tell me if this is already on your radar. I'm explaining the whole thing out, but tell me if this is already on your radar. The whole blue zones, Mediterranean diet concept of like people in certain places of like Japan and certain places in Greece and Turkey and Italy or whatever, where they have more fats and more fish and they drink a little bit more wine, so that you get this J-shaped curve of, if you have just the right amount of moderation and just the right amount of fish and chickpeas or whatever the fuck, it makes it to where that population is more likely to live to a certain age. This sociologist, he was like, this is all bullshit. Like, like when you test what's actually going on here, this whole thing is built on a fucking stack of lies. And he broke it down in a way that was very interesting, very convincing. And it seems like his view, so it's a little bit conspiratorial, but he does seem like he's a legitimate scientist, but it seems a little bit conspiratorial because it's like nobody in sociology, nobody in demography wants to acknowledge the fact that there's this huge methodology error that's happening. And so he outlined two things, which one was the J-shaped curve observation of like, if you drink a little bit, there's no real impact on life expectancy. If you drink too much, you die earlier. But if you drink in the middle, you tend to live a little bit longer. So there's this idea that like, is it antioxidants? Does it help with your heart rate? Blah, 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 blah. And he said, what my observation of the science is that alcohol is just fully poisonous completely. And less of it is always better. None of it is always better. And what's happening is most of this is self-reported. So when you have people who are heavy drinkers, they are likely to just die because alcohol is poison. And when you have people who don't drink at all, they're likely to be fucking alcoholics who don't just stop drinking because it was fucking killing them. And then the people in the middle who are drinking moderately have always had a moderate lifestyle, or they were already a little bit healthier to begin with, which means that alcohol never became enough of an issue for them that they needed to stop, to go all the way back to no alcohol at all. And so what you get is this effect of really unhealthy people who aren't drinking at all because they're fucking dying, or they've got other like health issues. And then people who are drinking a little bit, and then people who are drinking a lot. And the idea is the methodology error that's being made here is we're not taking a random group of people and then assigning them amounts to drink and then seeing who dies first, which that's how you answer this question. We're just going who doesn't and doesn't drink certain amounts. That's not telling us fucking anything, or it's telling us a different story. So that was one bit. Mm-hmm. And if you have any thoughts on that, I'd be curious to hear them now.
No, I got notes. You want to keep going?
Just so you can keep train of thought. Yeah, cool. And so the other thing is, he was talking about, so the life expectancy of these blue zone areas was crazy because, and I was like, damn, this goes back to my criticisms of the application of certain kinds of soft science, or even medical stuff, where it's like we can't use the conclusion of a study to make a broad strokes. Studies show that this has been proven, that we have to look at methodology and cite that as part of the thing. Like, this study was done and it found this through this methodology is, I think, part of making an argument. So basically what he said was, what's happening with the centenarian blue zones shit is, if you look at the areas that we are finding these people, one of the things that we find is that they are some of the poorest areas in those places with some of the worst record keeping. And so in a given population, you're going to have certain people who, for whatever reason, don't know their exact age, lie about their age, lie that they're older, lie that they're younger, whatever. Across time, the people who are, assuming that there's no effect, the people who are older are going to die first. And so what happens is, eventually you have a population where all the people who lied about being older are now the oldest people. And so their ages are extended into an imaginary number that goes beyond what their actual age is. Let's say you have a group of 50-year-olds, but among them, there's, I don't know, say 10 40-year-olds who are lying and saying they're 50. There'll be a year at which point everybody who was actually 50 was dead. And those 40-year-olds will still be alive because they're now only, 60 or whatever the fuck. And so when they get to the death age that everybody else in the group reported to, they're going to die at the same biological age as everybody else, but because they've lied, their on paper ages are a lot higher. And so that's the effect that he outlines. And the way that he substantiates that is he goes, most of the places where we're seeing these blue zones are in areas where, one, these people are in places where the record keeping is fucking terrible. So there's not good evidence that any of these people are this actual fucking age. And two, a whole bunch of the theories around what precipitates those like age effects aren't even necessarily that well observed in those areas. This like freedom of movement and community and things like that. The areas in Japan where they're talking about these blue zones don't even have most of that shit anyway. So he put together a pretty compelling case that maybe the evidence we have around who's fucking living long isn't actually there, that I found pretty compelling. So I thought it was interesting.
Yeah. So a lot of that is pretty spot on. So for example, like I was in public health school when a lot of those studies about the parabolic relationship with alcohol came out, right?
I remember you talking about it back.
Yeah. But basically as soon as that came out, like there were whole public health agencies saying that was not bullshit, true. and we're going to go out and prove that this is bullshit. So I remember there was a study that came out of Harvard's public health school, and the Canadian
so is the scientific community kind of on top of that?
Yeah, the scientific community is pretty on top of that. And the scientific community consensus now is, as you stated, that there's no healthy amount of alcohol. Like there's some alcohol that you can get away with if you're like on your P's and Q's for some stuff, but basically it is a poison. Every amount of alcohol that you get is bad for you.
Because it's just poison. Is there any kind of like social? Because as I was saying it, I was like, come on, man. But a glass of wine with a lovely ragu, come on, that's good for life, baby. Is the first thing that I was thinking. Is there any idea of like impact on well-being, not caused by alcohol, but caused by maybe the social effects of connection that alcohol facilitates, or anything like that? Or is it just not even?
If there is, I'm not tracking to it.
Okay.
I could speculate on a few things. For example, like I do imagine that alcohol, like we have a society that still puts alcohol very in the forefront of social interaction, and I would wonder 100%. What that correlation will look like, given the fact that Gen Z is one of the generations that has drank the less in recorded human history, and
motherfuckers lonely as hell.
So I do think that, but again, as a person who has studied public health and been a public health practitioner, like I got a bottle of bourbon right next to me. Like this is a bottle of Blanton's like right here.
We're praying for you, big dog. We're praying for you.
But there is no healthy amount of alcohol. Like you are healthier not drinking alcohol is the general consensus now. So I do think that's pretty.
There we go.
Pretty spot on.
And I think that he says something to that effect, which is that like just the myth has persisted rather than the scientific community had it fucked up. But the centenarian thing, he was like, the scientific community is actually resistant to the evidence.
I would say that from that perspective, I do think that that's a compelling case for the record keeping, but I also think that there are some other things that like the community has like kind of looked into specifically in regards to that goes a little bit deeper than record keeping. So I do think that a lot of people put too much stock as a person, a trained epidemiologist, people put too much stock in epidemiology. That's a methodological paper. Epi, as much as it tries to be, is not causal. Epi is about finding correlations. You can try your absolute hardest to make that a causal correlation by controlling for this and doing your...
Unless you start giving people diseases like the CIA did, then you can start finding shit out for real.
But even if you do that, then it becomes a different kind of study, right? It becomes clinical research, right? So
okay, so that's no longer epidemiology.
Exactly, right? So ideally what Epi does is high level analysis and says we found this correlation, and then you hand it to the clinical folks or the research scientists in labs, and you say, okay, now you find if this is causal, or you find what the mechanism by which this will happen based on how strong this correlation is. So I do think that with those studies with like the Mediterranean diet and all this kind of stuff, like I think we did a lot of Epi, and I think that a lot of people didn't take the next step, at least early on, to do a lot of the root cause like mechanism analysis, and we just ran with it. And there are certain cases where like that is valid, and I don't think this was one. So as I talked about many moons ago, we still don't have really good evidence on what the mechanism of why smoking cigarettes causes cancer. The only reason why we ran with that is because it is the strongest fucking correlation that anybody has seen in like any study ever. Like, for example, if I get like a risk ratio that's
so we don't have cause, but it's just the correlation is so strong that it's like, dog, what else could it be unless motherfuckers who are
man.
predestined to get lung cancer also have a propensity to get addicted to cigarettes, which
and
maybe could be the cause, but yeah.
And they've controlled for all that in like hundreds of studies. Motherfuckers were like, we can't fucking ignore this shit, but we don't know exactly why that happens.
Oh, interesting. But, I didn't know that.
Yeah. But if you looking specifically at those kind of things, I do think that he ignores some of the things that scientists are exploring now from a clinical perspective. So I'm thinking in a lot of those countries, even in like the poorer areas, you have less exposure than you would in the European extreme west and say like a London,
certain
France.
Toxins.
Yeah, exactly. And the exposome is a huge thing and a huge burgeoning area of research that I think you're going to get more out of it. There's a research scientist out of my public health school, Gary Miller, who does like a lot of work in that space. And it's very much it makes sense from a correlation perspective, because if you look at the EU in particular, and if you look in Japan, they're much more tighter controlled in current state in terms of the amount of exposures and chemicals that they allow even their poorest people to get exposed to versus other areas that have lower life expectancies. There's also the fact that we have found certain genetic markers where you have genetic protection versus some of the exposures as a part of that, right? So, your grandmother.
Can I mention? I'm thinking, when I think about centenarians, what you said kind of clicks, because it's like, if you're looking at a population of people who have survived through, let's say that there's some extra violence or some extra issues in a poorer area. Once you've gotten past the section of your age where that's your likely cause of death, and the things that are going to kill you are going to be like illness, cancer, etc., then if you live in a place where those things are less of an issue, the likelihood that you make it, it's like, cool, it might be a low probability that you make it from 20 to 30, but the probability that you get from 90 to 100 is higher in a place like this. Is a potential effect that just clicked when you said that.
Yes, absolutely. And what was my point? Where was I going with that?
Oh, fuck, sorry about that.
No, we're good. And I think that was very good to like call out, because I agree with it. But I think
that's the best shit you could have said, because I agree.
100%. Like, I'm all over
Alvin Bud, let's go.
Yeah. But the genetic protectiveness of a lot of this stuff is like, your grandmother that smoked a lot of cigarettes and didn't get cancer, right? Or didn't get emphysema. Like, there are actual genetic, and again, this is more of in the correlation space, but there are certain genetic markers that are correlated with people who have these exposures but still live long in a verified prospective cohort study kind of fashion, even though not a clinical
one. What's prospective mean?
So it's when you, similar to like what, so I can only explain it in relation to something. So it's like, if you're doing like a randomized control trial, it's like you're picking people, you're exposing them to something or not exposing them to something, and then you're tracking them through that process with a prospective cohort study.
Oh,
yeah.
Sorry.
But for a prospective cohort study, it doesn't necessarily have to be longitudinal, but they usually are. It's from a data perspective, you're starting at the beginning of a process and you're tracing them through several steps, whether that be in person with interviews or whether that be via the records. But you're starting from the beginning and you're tracing it forward, but you're utilizing data as opposed to the controlled randomized aspect of a randomized control study with testing and all that kind of stuff. So it's also kind of like neither here nor there, because it kind of is a jargon point that doesn't add anything to the point. But when you're doing those kind of studies and you're following,
one thing I was going to do is throw in some jargon. So we'd love to see
100%. And when you're following those points forward, there's a lot that I think can make it so that people in these places actually do have something that increases it, and it's not just like a simple record keeping error. Even though I do think that's a really good hypothesis, I think that's really well.
I think it's interesting, because it does seem like even if the effect is still there, his criticism of the methodology of several of these studies is correct. Where like
Yes.
he's going like, sure, maybe y'all accidentally did discover an effect, but y'all the way that you went about finding it is fucking wrong. Because
Yeah.
you're not controlling for the fact that there's no way for us to test how old these people actually are. Like we're not testing for survivability, and we're not in a country that has good record keeping. So y'all don't actually know how old these people are. You just know how old the records say they are, which is a totally different metric, unfortunately. But I do think there's like one of the reasons that I've always thought that the Mediterranean blue zone thing seemed like a little bit of potential bullshit, or like required some additional evidence, was like how we know Japanese people and Greeks just don't live longer on some natural shit, because that's literally how every other kind of organism works. Like we live longer than rats, not because we eat some different shit. We're genetically predisposed to live longer. So why wouldn't that affect? Like, why would we assume that the effect has to be diet related? We're assuming that all humans are just genetic. It's like, no, we know even within a single population, a lot of the reason that motherfuckers live mad long is because of some genetic shit combined with, there are other effects that we know are going on. But it's like,
There's genotype and phenotype. There's nature and nurture. But yeah, genetics plays a part, I believe.
So it's like, yeah, because then I would go like, okay, are we seeing this effect if you have like what I would look at is what happens when you have Japanese food pop off in a foreign country? Do we see 50 years later those motherfuckers start living longer? And that's we don't have any information on that, but that's what I'd be curious to see. But if you just go, yeah, there's a pocket of people who live longer, especially when they're living to hundreds of years, where it's like we're not necessarily measuring well understood, like, oh, they're less likely to get diabetes or less likely to starve in their 20s or that kind of thing. We're seeing like, oh, they're just not dying at 99. That seems like, man, that could be fucking anything. Or y'all are doing like throwing chicken bones trying to figure out like, oh, I guess it's what they ate. Like maybe, I don't know. That seems like a huge stretch to me.
And also to the point that you brought up earlier in regards to methodology, there are ways to do that, right? Like you can do like survival curves and like Kaplan-Meier analysis. Like you can do certain things if the records are good, but to the point, when we're dealing with people of this age, the records probably aren't.
That's the main issue. That was his main thing, is like, yeah.
And also like, and we do got to wrap it up, but I don't think people fully understand how bad medical records are until like 40 years ago in most countries.
No,
I don't think people realize. Like these records are horrible. Like I did a whole thing about transcribing medical records from like the 70s in the United States as a practicum like experience kind of thing. And they are all fucking horrible. The best thing that ever happened was these case management systems. And even those aren't great. They're just like, this is better than what motherfuckers was doing, in the 70s.
Yeah. We just got shit computerized. He pointed out a great fucking thing. He said one of these blue zones, the main cause of this blue zone, this supposed blue zone, was that the place was fucking post World War II, occupied by American troops. They blew up and burned up all the Japanese records. Don't speak fucking Japanese, and so all of the record keeping that was done was by a foreign military that did not speak the language, trying to keep records of whose birth, who was born when, and which, and all of this kind of shit, whose name was what. And those are the records that we're going off. That seemed like a bad plan to me.
Agreed. And speaking of bad plans, if you are the CEO of a company and you are looking to staff all of your teams top to bottom with divas,
RuPaul's Drag Race, yeah. We sashaying.
You might be getting ready to see a red flag. But if you are a person that is being critical of the data that suggests that the Mediterranean diet is the end all be all for long-term health and prosperity, you might be waving a red flag at that point. It's been waving the red flag. It has been Alvin. It's been Edward. Josh has been off saving kittens in the floods down south as the snow melts. But he'll be back.
He put them there to begin with, but he is also saving them as well. So you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, 100%. But after all that's done, as the temperatures warm up, all the cats will be safe. He won't have any cats to put in danger as well, because they'll already be found in good homes. But make sure that you are checking out your boys wherever waving the red flag is sold. Make sure that you're liking, subscribing, making sure that you are looking at the Patreon, we have a very thriving Discord community that you can take advantage of as a part of those benefits. I've been jumping in recently. Eddie spends a lot of time in there. Josh is becoming active. So not only can you have some potential one-off conversations with your boys, but you can also be a part of the thriving community that exists outside of us that we're trying to build around the podcast as well. Make sure
Like-minded
that
type
you're
folks.
like-minded type folks, 100%. Make sure that you're checking out all of the merch, all of the paraphernalia, all of the card games as they are available, shipping worldwide, semi, sort of, kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah. What else I'm leaving out, Edward?
That's everything. You know what I'm saying? You can become a member through Spotify, Patreon, YouTube. All of those will give you access to the Discord and all of our community benefits. And oh yeah, of course, grab the card game that. Oh yeah, no, fuck, you already said it. Yeah, worldwide, you got it. Perfect, exceptional, great.
100%. Doing what I do.
Yeah,
So yeah.
and doing it well.
It's a red flag.